All right, let's get our attention back, shall we, to the Hellenistic philosophies. Last time we were on Epicureanism, with its beginnings as far as the hedonistic ethic is concerned in the ancient Cyrenaics, and then with the addition of Democritus' animism, materialistic metaphysic, developing the distinctively Epicurean philosophy, which, as we noted, was going to have a resurgence and considerable attention in modern times when the scientific revolution of the Renaissance abandoned the Pythagorean and Aristotelian approaches to science, with formal causes and final causes. Scientific revolution left simply matter, material cause, efficient cause, natural forces, and that is what made Democritus attractive, because it sounded very much like Democritus' idea. So Epicureanism is going to figure later on. Something similar can be said of Stoicism, also of Hellenistic skepticism, also of Neoplatonism. Those, in fact, are the four main Hellenistic philosophies, and every one of them has far-reaching influence later in the history of thought. So it's important at this stage to get a good handle on what they are. Stoicism, I was commenting last time about its roots, where the starting point in terms of the Stoic ethic is in the attitude of the ancient Cynics, particularly their detachment from externals, external comforts, external troubles, in an attempt to get back to nature, to live in harmony with nature in a simple sort of way. Now, I think that in that the two key themes carried over into Stoicism are, one, detachment from external circumstances. Detachment from external circumstances. And secondly, living in harmony with nature. Living in harmony with nature. The outcome is that in the Stoic ethic, as such, the main virtue which they sought, the good that they sought, was known as apatheia. And yes, it's from that term that we get apathetic, get the note of indifference. Apatheia. Apatheia literally, the alpha privative and then the noun, is freedom from passion, having no emotional upset. You see, detachment in that sense, an emotional detachment from the external circumstances. It was said of the Roman slave Epictetus, who subsequently became one of the Stoic philosophers, that his slave master one time was molesting him physically, viciously twisting his leg, to which he complained, "You're going to break it." And he did break it, and without any further ado, Epictetus apparently limped for the rest of his life. Detachment from such bodily circumstances. Now, whether the story is true or apocryphal, it illustrates the point. It reminds me of the time when I was, some years ago, sitting in the dentist's chair while the dentist was doing what dentists statistically love to do. And when he had my mouth nicely filled with his beer, he asked what I taught, and when, in between gurgles, I told him what, he drilled a little bit more, and when he got an appropriate neural response, asked, "I wonder what a Stoic would say now." Detachment from, you see. I wasn't in a condition to tell him I wasn't a Stoic and explain why, but all right, the Stoic attitude. But there's more to it than simply in a matter of emotional detachment, because this supreme good, apatheia, can be achieved by the rational control of the passions. By the rational control of the passions. Now, this is going to be a theme that we're going to hear a lot of. Oh, in a way, it's anticipated in Plato, where it's the intellect that has to eventually control the appetites, you see. But as we get into modern times with people like Descartes and Spinoza, you'll find this theme again to the effect that an emotion, a passion, is a confused idea. And when intellect, reason, is able to get a clear and distinct idea of what's really going on, then that clarity of thought dispels all emotion. Reason controls the passions by its clarity of understanding. Now, that, I think, has very plainly its roots in the Stoics, because the Stoics were not simply shutting their eyes to problems, pain. They saw particular circumstances as part of the world order. That is to say, as a logical part, a rational part, an intelligible part of the rule of law throughout the natural world. And if the adversity that comes to you comes as a result of the operations of natural law, then after all, what can you do about it? Seeing that clearly, you're in a position to accept it, to gain a rational detachment from it, and to try in future to order your own life in harmony with nature and natural law, you see. So the idea of apatheia is tied to the notion of ordering your life in harmony with the natural order, with the laws of nature. Consequently, it follows that not only emotional upset, but moral evil is basically due to being out of harmony with natural law. Moral evil is due to our irrational impulses, like the pursuit of pleasure, greed, anxiety, fear. You see, and under those impulses, we tend to act in the face of circumstances in ways that are contrary to nature. That phrase, contrary to nature, you see, stands in contrast to harmony with nature. Contrary to nature, in harmony with nature. And moral evil is what is contrary to nature. Sin against nature. something unnatural. The practice of Stoicism was, in a way, almost like a religion. The term nature was roughly synonymous with the term God, but an impersonal God. A kind of pantheism is what is involved, a kind of pantheism. And here we begin to get then into the philosophy of nature as such. Nature is one unified whole. And under the influence of Heraclitus, it is one whole with two aspects, two ways in which we can think of it. In fact, the terms nature and God seem to indicate those two ways. Because if we think of nature as simply inert substratum of matter, then that implies something passive, something that is ordered but doesn't do the ordering. On the other hand, if we speak of God, that suggests something active, which is not so much acted on, but acts and does the ordering of nature. So you have two aspects, if you like, one passive and one active. And the active one is, of course, the rational one. The passive is simply our materiality, the material existence, which is ordered. Now, it's this God, this active side of nature, which is the focus, and which gets to be spoken of as logos. And so I call this a logos philosophy of nature. That is to say, the active force is this cosmic reason. Anaxagoras called it nous, mind. Heraclitus called it logos. The Stoics sometimes speak of it as God or providence. Meantime, the material processes of nature involve the four elements, with cycles of orderedness and fiery conflagration, cyclical kind of cosmology. Nature, with its ordered processes, is therefore a deterministic kind of grid, so that natural laws are causal forces at work in nature. Causal forces of an ordered sort, of a uniform sort, regular and intelligible. And as with other Greeks, so it is with human nature, that we find again the two aspects of nature in human beings. We ordinarily think of them as body and soul, one passive, the other active. And the soul is spoken of as the logos. Yes, as in fact a seed of the logos spermaticos is the phrase they use. A seminal kind of logos is the living soul of a living thing. It pervades the body, giving it ordered activities and motion. So that this seed of the divine logos, which is the human soul, operates through 8 means. The 5 physical senses, our reproductive powers, our thinking, and our speech. The 5 senses plus sex, thought, speech. All of these then being the living activities made possible by the seminal logos. Now, one interesting note here is that the Stoics regard the soul, this life force, as being itself a material thing. Not immaterial, but material. And that's perfectly understandable when you consider that they're equating nature with God, and seeing nature as composed of the 4 elements. That is to say, if the cosmic logos is the totality of nature, and the totality of nature is composed of the 4 elements, you see. And if the human soul is a seed of that cosmic logos, then it too is going to be composed of elements. It too is going to be material. Now, that means that in reproduction, which is one of the activities of the logos, soul and body are reproduced together. So that what you have is known in later theological language as traducianism, the notion that the soul is transmitted with the body from father to child. Now, the way in which they understood it then is simply that the offspring are contained in miniature in the father's seed. The offspring in miniature contain soul as well as body, which, deposited in a warm place, proceed to grow to childhood and adulthood. This is what in biology gets to be known as animalculism. Animalculism, which was one view of genetics intermittently because of Stoic influence in subsequent years, emerged again around the 18th century, late 18th century, with the beginnings of biology, and was really only eclipsed with the gradual development of modern genetics. But this Stoic view provided some early Christian theologians with a way of accounting for the origin of the human soul, you see. We'll be noticing shortly that the church father Tertullian, who said more anti-philosophical things than I think most of the rest of the church fathers put together, Tertullian was very much indebted to Stoicism in a number of regards. But in this regard, it was he in particular who adopted this view of the soul and the transmission of the soul traducianism, and as a result, transmitted traducianism into subsequent theology, interestingly. And you still find it in some theology texts, somehow or other detached from its original biological basis, but you still find it occasionally. Now, the soul, then, being a material thing, is transmitted in that way And the early Stoics did at least conceive of it surviving death by being reunited with the world soul, with the cosmic logos. Okay, and I guess one other thing in this general context of the logos philosophy is the bearing of the logos doctrine on epistemology, human knowledge. The Stoics, as you gather from their materialism, reject any notion of immaterial transcendent forms, any kind of Platonic or Aristotelian forms, for that matter. All that exists is particulars with various size and composite natures. Everything comes from particulars, there's nothing else. So then, as far as human knowledge is concerned, knowledge derives from impressions, sense impressions, that we have of particulars. So that the ordered causal processes of nature produce these impressions on the consciousness. Impressions on what? On the consciousness, which is, apart from these impressions, what they called tabula rasa, a blank tablet, like a blank tablet of wax, on which a seal makes an impression, or a blank piece of paper, on which a marker makes an impression. Okay? So the mind is blank at birth. Notice that differs from Plato, who claimed we had innate knowledge. It differs from Aristotle, who talked of potential intellect, not blank, but loaded with capacity. For the Stoics, we are the passive recipients of sense impressions, tabula rasa. And from those sense impressions, we develop our own ideas, so that impressions lead to the development of ideas. Now, the result of this is a representational theory of knowledge. A representational theory of knowledge. That is to say, the mind, the consciousness, is so affected by outside forces that impressions develop, which lead to the development of ideas. And these are representations of whatever external object it is which produced impressions. Now, this becomes, in, again, Renaissance times, and with this materialistic metaphysic, this becomes the standard theory of knowledge transmitted into 17th and 18th century philosophy in Britain and on the continent of Europe. In intro, you probably met it in Descartes, for whom there were ideas that purportedly represent things external to us. In John Locke, empirical ideas which represent things external to us. And both Descartes and Locke are very explicit that the direct object, the immediate object of the consciousness, is not an external object, a material thing. What you're aware of in your mind, your idea. You see? Your ideas and the sense impressions, that's what you're aware of. Which immediately opens up the huge question for 18th century epistemology. If all I know is my ideas, how do I know there's anything out there like the ideas? How can we know that material objects exist? How can we know that other minds exist? How can we know that God exists? If all we know, in a direct apprehension, are our own ideas. And so that kind of question then is implicit in this Stoic epistemology. It led them to look for a criterion of truth. A criterion to assure that the ideas are indeed correct representations. And the criterion they came up with was that the ideas must have clarity and distinctness. It is an intuitive test. Those ideas that are so clear and so distinct as to be beyond doubt, they are irresistible ideas. Those we can take to be true. Irresistible ideas. It's not that we unreflectively immediately see that it's clear and distinct, but upon reflection, upon scrutiny, we realize, yeah, this is indeed a clear and distinct understanding that I have. And that is the hallmark of truth. Well, if that sounds like an anticipation of what you may have learned earlier about Descartes, it is. The very language, clear and distinct ideas, is also Descartes' language. So it's an influential notion beginning back there in the Stoics. Okay, so we have then the roots, the ethics, and the philosophy of nature. Now, what I'd like to do is to look at the selections that we have in Kaufmann, and let you see some of the significant things in that. The three selections we have, rather, two of them, Zeno and Cleanthes, beginning on 467,